Hey friend, please subscribe. 1 second for you. Big deal for me.
The rain was slapping sideways when I killed the neon open sign. It hissed like it was mad about closing. I was locking up Harbor Loaf, my bakery in Ballard, around 10:40 that night, November 19th, 2017. The wind off the canal was cutting through my coat like I wasn't wearing one. I just wanted to count out the till and go home. That's when I saw her. Little girl, maybe 9, sitting under the bus stop awning across the street. Soaked, shivering. Her purple jacket was too bright for a night like that, and it clung to her arms like wet tissue. One pant leg rolled up high, revealing a carbon fiber leg below the knee. She wasn't crying. Just sitting there with a dented-up pink lunchbox on her lap, holding it tight like it mattered more than her coat. I jogged over. "You stuck?" I asked. She nodded once, lips purple, teeth chattering. Quick note. Before we start, share in the comments. How's your day going and where are you joining from? And let's continue. "Come on," I said. "You're not sitting out here all night." I unlocked the shop and waved her in. She moved slow, dragging the squeaky foot across the wet rubber mat like it had a mind of its own, cranked both heaters, pulled 2 stools to the counter, made her hot chocolate and piled on the whipped cream like it was a birthday party. She wrapped her fingers around the mug like she hadn't held warmth in weeks. "Name's Nina," she said, soft but steady. "Mom's working late." "Where at?" "She cleans offices downtown. Usually done by 10. Maybe her phone died." I slid her a warm ham and cheese from the tray I was about to toss. Threw in a cinnamon knot that didn't sell. She didn't hesitate. Just said, "Thank you," and ate like she was rationing each bite. I asked if she had a number for her mom. She pulled a damp folded note from her lunchbox. It had 2 numbers written in Sharpie. I tried both. First went to voicemail. Second didn't even ring. "Got a picture?" I asked. She nodded and handed over a phone with a cracked screen. There was her mom, Evelyn, maybe 35, tired eyes, hair pulled back. Looked like she'd seen enough of the world but kept going anyway. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something that stopped me cold. Across the street, a black Escalade had pulled up. Lights off, engine running. Just sitting there. I looked away, like that would make it go. A few minutes later, door swings open. Woman walks in wearing a clean raincoat and heels too high for puddles. "I'm Tessa," she said, voice smooth like customer service. "I'm here to pick up Nina. Her grandfather sent me." Evelyn got caught up. Nina didn't move, just looked at me like she was waiting for my call. I wasn't her dad. I wasn't even a friend. I was just the guy who gave her hot chocolate and tried to do right. Still, I felt something wasn't quite square. I packed 2 butter cookies into wax paper and slipped them in her pocket. "Tell your mom Stanley from Harbor Loaf kept you warm." Tessa smiled like a flight attendant, all polite edges, and opened her umbrella. Nina took her hand. As they crossed the street, the Escalade's door opened. Someone was already inside, watching, waiting. Rain hit the awning like nails on a roof. I stood there, holding a damp dish towel and wondering what the hell just walked out of my shop. I locked up, counted the empty drawer. Rent was due in 12 days, and I was short $900. I told myself I did enough. Looking back, that was the moment. That pause right there. That second where I felt something off and did nothing. That's when the night changed. Next morning, I was elbow deep in dough at 4:25. Just me, the mixer, and the smell of flour grinding into my skin. My shoulders were already screaming from the sourdough batch, but I had 3 more tubs to prep before sunrise. I didn't hear the bell at first over the noise, but when I did, I looked up, expecting a supplier or Trent coming in early. Instead, a tall man in a slate wool coat stepped in like he owned the damn oxygen. "Mr. Reed," he said. I wiped my hands on my apron. "That's me. I'm Graham Markham. Markham Table Group." Just hearing the name made the lights feel brighter. That was the guy in the Escalade. He didn't bother to sit. Just walked up to the counter and looked around like he was evaluating square footage. He glanced at the trays of prepped pastries I'd boxed for the morning pickup, then placed a folder between us like he was delivering a subpoena. I appreciated what you did for my granddaughter last night. He didn't say thank you. He said appreciated, like a quarterly memo. I opened the folder, flour still on my fingers, and skimmed through pages that didn't belong in a small-town bakery. Supplier agreement, volume estimates, distribution outlines, breakdown by store and region. 22 cafes across Washington and Oregon, launching a breakfast rebrand in the first quarter. They wanted to feature a local artisan partner. Starting volume could reach 1,600 units a day by March, he said. I did the math in my head. Crude, fast, 312 grand in annual gross, maybe half of that after labor, ingredients, packaging, fuel, the 100 other hidden costs people forget. But the part that grabbed me hard was at the bottom of the second page, 12-month exclusivity clause. Auto-renew. Penalties for breach. Not negotiable. I looked up. That's a hell of a contract to drop before sunrise. He didn't blink. I don't do charity, Mr. Reed. I settle accounts. I boxed a tray of crullers, the sugar sticking to my fingertips. You said granddaughter. Nina? She's fine. His voice said the conversation ended there. His eyes said don't even try asking more. I thought about the busted espresso machine I hadn't fixed yet. About my rent. $4,860 due on the 1st, and I was already short by $900. Can I think on it for a few days? You've got 48 hours. Tessa came in through the door like she'd been waiting for her cue. Same raincoat. Same practiced calm. She placed her card next to the folder, offered a clipped smile, and didn't say anything else. They walked out like they were leaving a boardroom, not a bakery. Smelled like leather and new cars the second they were gone. I leaned on the prep table, hands gritty with flour, croissants proofing beside me like pale little boats. The exclusivity clause screamed at me from the open folder. One supplier, no outside sales, locked in for a year with a 12-month no-fault renewal. Only way out was legal fees and blood pressure meds. I grabbed the counterphone and dialed the number from the note Nina had shown me. This time, it rang. Then a soft voice picked up. Hello? Hi, this is Stanley. I run Harbor Loaf. I, kept Nina out of the rain last night. Just wanted to check in a pause. Then she said, Thank you. I'm really grateful you were there. My father sent Tessa to pick her up. It won't happen again. The way she said my father made something shift in my gut, like a kid forced to say sir at every dinner table. She okay? I asked. Seemed scared to leave. She's used to being careful. But she's fine. Thank you again. She hung up before I could say anything else. I stood there for a while, watching the early light hit the windows across Market Street. Clouds were starting to break just barely, but it didn't feel like relief. More like the kind of morning where the sky fakes you out and dumps rain an hour later. Small suppliers don't get many lifelines. The big chains get them. The ones with lawyers and spreadsheets and investors who've never touched dough in their lives. This felt like a lifeline, sure, but it had a hook in it, and I could already feel it catching. I signed the provisional agreement on November 22nd. 90-day review window, 10-store launch if everything didn't collapse first. The paper didn't feel real in my hands. What did feel real was the 6:30 a.m. tour they scheduled the next morning at the Markham Table Group Commissary in Sodo. Their operation wasn't a kitchen. It was a machine with tile floors. Industrial ovens the size of panel vans lined the walls, blowing heat like jet engines. The ceilings were high and white, with a quiet hum overhead from whatever system kept that place colder than you'd expect. Men and women in black aprons and hairnets moved like parts in a clock. No wasted steps, no second looks. Tessa met me at the entrance. Same controlled tone, same unreadable expression. This way, mister. Reed. Stanley's fine. She didn't acknowledge that. Just turned on her heel and walked. She moved fast, but not too fast. She had a way of tracking where my eyes landed. When I paused at a frozen dough packaging line, she paused. When I glanced at a clipboard station where 3 guys were checking timestamps, She gave it an extra 2 seconds. That's how I knew she was paying attention. For her boss, not for me. We were halfway through the refrigeration bay when a man with gray hair and a dead stare held out his hand like he expected me to kiss a ring. Owen Prentice. Procurement. I shook it. Firm, but he squeezed harder, like he wanted to measure the bones in my palm. Pleasure, I said. He nodded once and kept walking, no small talk. That was the first time I got the feeling I was being weighed, broken down into margin, not value. Tessa led me through a double-door set marked "Client Tour Ends Here," but we didn't stop. She had clearance. We stepped into a polished hallway with security glass on both sides. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the faint buzz of a commercial-grade mixer cranking into gear. Eveline was already in the hallway when we turned the corner. Jeans, gray sweater, no makeup, and a 1,000-yard stare that blinked off the moment she saw Nina roll in beside her on a little purple scooter. "Morning," I said. She gave me a small smile. "Thanks for last night," she said. Not to me. About me. Like she was reading off a thank you card someone told her to send. She hugged Nina, quick and low to the side, then straightened like she'd remembered someone might be watching through the glass. Graham showed up 10 minutes late. No apology. The hallway just shifted when he arrived. People moved out of the way like he was weather, not a man. He didn't waste time. "What's your shelf life on current product, assuming thaw and serve at 41 degrees? 3.5 days, but quality drops hard after 36 hours. Transport loss? 0.8% if packed right. Up to 1.5 if you let steam stay trapped." We walked past racks of boxed pastries stacked like bricks. I explained dough temperature ranges, butter lamination, the science of what happens when you cut corners. Owen smirked at that last part. He looked like a guy who'd cut plenty of corners and blamed the line cook when things fell apart. Nina tugged her mom's sleeve. "Can I watch the big mixer?" Before Eveline could answer, Tessa said, "She can. I'll stay with her." Nina grinned and rolled off down the hall like she already knew the way. I stood with Eveline by a rack of sheet pans. We made small talk, but it wasn't small. "How long have you been baking?" she asked. "Since I was 17. Had a boss who made everything from scratch. It stuck." She nodded. "My dad used to take me to a place in Tacoma when I was a kid. Guy there made pie crust so light it practically flaked in the air. He sounds like he gave a damn. He did. That's why the place is gone now." She didn't say anything else for a beat. Then, "My father's helping me. With some things." Nina's trust, mostly. She used the word conditions without using it. But I heard custody hiding behind it. I didn't push. We made our way back to the main conference table near the test kitchen. Graham stood at the head holding a printed rollout schedule. "We're prepared to launch a pilot, 8 stores. Up to 800 units per day starting January 9th. I flipped to the financials in my folder. Not bad, but not enough. 12 stores. Hard review at 60 days. His eyes flicked to mine like he was recalculating. 10 stores, he said. Non-negotiable. We shook on it. His grip didn't crush, didn't linger, but it wasn't warm. It said, "You're in the family, but you're not family." Tessa came back with Nina, who was happily rambling about mixer speeds and gear ratios. Eveline looked relieved, but didn't show it outright. Just gave me a sideways glance that said she wasn't used to watching someone else handle her kid that well. As we walked out, Owen caught up and stepped beside me like he'd been waiting for the right moment. "I've got other bakeries lined up, Reed. You're not the only guy who knows dough." I stopped walking. "You threatening me already?" He smiled, that tight procurement guy smirk. "I'm giving you motivation." "Don't slip." I held his stare. I didn't blink. Back in the truck, I drove up 15th Avenue with the sunrise bouncing off the dashboard, contract folder tossed on the seat like it might burn through it. I told myself I'd made a smart move, that the numbers made sense, that it was time to grow. But deep down, I knew the truth. I'd just shaken hands on a great deal with bad people. By the time I made it back to the bakery that night, I had 10 emails from Markham's team and no feeling left in my arms. That was November 23rd. December came down like a damn brick. The first weekend hit harder than I expected. Holiday orders backed up, wholesale pickups showing up 2 hours early, and a line out the door before sunrise. I was refilling trays faster than I could stack them. Burned through a full week's butter in 4 days. I drove to Kent on a Monday and paid $3,400 in cash for a used proofer from a retired baker who looked like he hadn't smiled since Reagan. I hauled it back myself in a borrowed van and spent 2 hours wrestling it into the corner of the back room, scraping drywall and my knuckles along the way. But it worked. That machine saved my ass. Trent was staying late without being asked, and for a minute, I thought maybe we were finally on the same page. That was until he leaned against the flour bin one night and said, "If I'm pulling nights, I want 20%. Full equity." I looked at him like he'd grown a second head. "Try 8, I said, "with a bonus if we hit 1,200 units daily by February 10th. He smiled, but not with his eyes. That part should have hit me harder than it did. I chalked it up to stress. Now I know better. Nina and Eveline dropped by twice during the first couple weeks. We cleared off a milk crate and flipped a baking tray upside down so Nina could have her own stool to watch the racks rise. She asked 100 questions about yeast, why it bubbles, how you know when it's tired. Sharp kid. Didn't miss a thing. Eveline brought soup the second time. I was mid-batch and hadn't eaten since the night before. She set the thermos down and said, "I figured you skipped dinner." Then she wiped flour off my cheek like it wasn't a big deal. "Thanks," I said. She nodded. "You look like a guy who needs to remember food isn't just work." That stuck with me longer than I wanted to admit. 3 days later, my landlord came by to look at the water meter. Real casual. He was halfway back to his car when he turned around and said, "Hey, just so you know, developer made an offer on the building. Full cash. It's not a done deal, but notice could be 90 days. He said it like he was commenting on the weather. Then he got in his truck and drove off. I didn't have time to panic. I had 7 wholesale orders due before Thursday, and a walk-in freezer that was acting up again. I called Tessa that night while loading muffins into the back fridge. "Any word on longer-term contracts after the pilot?" I asked. Her answer was smooth but careful. "That'll depend on the board. They're reviewing volume, margins, and pricing next month. Any chance they'll give me heads up on direction?" She paused. "After the pricing reevaluation, yes. Not before I knew what that meant. Sit tight. Keep baking. Don't ask too many questions." The next morning I got an email from Owen. Subject line, cost optimization suggestion. He wanted me to swap out butter for flexible fats. His words. I hit reply and typed 1 word. Then I hit return and wrote it 2 more times. Number. 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 His reply came 10 minutes later. Just a smiley face. That was the moment I started hating him more than I knew. A week later, we did a tasting with Graham in their polished back room at HQ. White tablecloth, silver utensils, full setup like a photo shoot. He picked up a croissant, took 2 bites, then looked at his watch. "Can you scale this to 2,400 daily?" I didn't blink. "Sure. If you don't mind losing quality." He leaned back in the chair. "Standards are a luxury, mister. Read. Consistency is the business." That sentence sat in my gut like undercooked dough. I didn't argue, but I didn't nod either. Afterward, I walked back to my truck feeling like I'd just been asked to sell a knockoff version of my own name. Rent was due on the 2nd. I paid it late. Again. Another $60 gone to a fee I couldn't fight. I stood at the register counting coins just to clear the check. My hands were shaking and not from the cold. That night, I went home, set 2 alarms on my phone, and crashed in my clothes on top of the bed like I was back in high school pulling doubles at a pizza shop. I told myself I just had to make it to January. That was the first time I realized the real problem wasn't the volume or the money. It was the pressure to make things faster, cheaper, smoother, all while pretending it didn't change anything. It did. It always does. I didn't even have time to rinse the flour off my boots before the elevator dinged open on the 12th floor. The Markham Vendor Summit was set up like a courtroom in a hotel conference room in Belltown. 10 suits lined up on one side, 6 vendors on the other. I was the only one who looked like he'd just pulled a tray out of a convection oven, because I had. They gave us glossy folders with the agenda like this was school picture day. Water bottles, legal pads, not a crumb in sight. I dropped mine and pulled out my own stack. Cost projections, spoilage curves, and a page on employee retention I'd written at midnight with a Red Bull and a ballpoint pen. Tessa was already seated by the projector, calm, collected, eyes scanning the room like a goalie guarding the net. Eveline sat next to her, not making eye contact with anyone, just flipping through a notebook and checking something off with a tight jaw. Graham sat at the head of the table like the table belonged to him, which it did. Owen kicked things off with a clicker and a chart on a big screen. He pitched offshore pastry shells like he was selling vacation homes. By shifting prep to our Southeast Asia partners and finishing local, we save on labor, reduce spoilage, and improve unit margin by 22%. People around the table nodded. He flipped to a bar graph showing price per unit in bold green. Someone said, "Impressive." I leaned forward. "Over 3 years," I said, "those savings get swallowed by turnover, training loss, product inconsistency, and customer churn." Owen didn't turn, just tapped the next slide. I held up my sheet. "You save 30 cents a croissant this year. You lose twice that next year when your quality tanks, your health code violations go up, and your neighborhood customer base starts writing reviews about stale pastry that tastes like freezer burn." One of the suits across the room, mid-40s, shiny watch, asked, "Do you have data to support that?" "I have 14 years of hands-on experience, and a growing wholesale line I built from scratch without cutting corners. That's my data." Graham looked out the window like he was waiting for a plane to land. Eveline's pen kept moving. Tessa's eyes never left the room. I pushed my second paper across the table. Smaller but bolder. Layoffs don't just impact line items. They rip communities. People talk. Neighborhoods talk. You lose more than money when you treat people like parts. Owen exhaled like I was exhausting. "This isn't about idealism, Mr. Reed," he said. "This is about scale. If you want a seat at this table, you need to think big." I stared right back. Big doesn't mean empty. Then I slid out the third page. My last shot. I want a union-friendly clause in the vendor charter, and a pledge to source local dairy that got the room quiet. Someone coughed. A chair creaked. Owen laughed. It was quiet, but not quiet enough. The kind of laugh that says you're cute for thinking this matters. I didn't blink. "Say what you want," I said. "But don't tell me you care about quality while pushing margarine and mystery shells." Graham leaned forward. "We'll table it." That was his verdict. No emotion, no signal of agreement or refusal. Just the kind of tone that closed doors without making noise. The meeting moved on. Talking points, more numbers. A slideshow about shelf-ready packaging I didn't listen to. When it ended, I stood near the elevator trying to keep the sweat from bleeding through my shirt. My hands smelled like yeast and printer ink. Eveline caught up. "Hey," she said, almost like she wasn't sure I'd want to talk. I gave her a nod. "That go how you expected?" She shrugged. "My dad's not used to being told no." "Neither am I," I said. We both smiled. Dumb, crooked smiles that didn't mean anything but said everything. The elevator opened, and she stepped in. Right before the doors closed, she said, "You were right to say it." I drove back through Queen Anne in silence. No radio, just streetlights blinking past and my mind looping through every look Owen gave me. I kept wondering if I'd tank the whole deal just by having a spine. At a red light on Dexter, I glanced at my phone. New email from my landlord. Subject: Update on building sale. I pulled into a 7-Eleven lot and opened it with a pit in my stomach. Purchase and sale agreement signed. Potential close date: May 14th, 2018. No pleasantries, just the facts. I stared at the date and started running the numbers on a napkin I pulled from my glove box. What I'd saved, what I hadn't, what I'd need. I was so locked into the math I didn't see the city bus braking until I nearly rolled into its back bumper. I slammed the brakes and threw the napkin to the floor. That was when it hit me. I wasn't just baking to survive anymore. I was fighting to keep something mine in a game that was built to make me feel replaceable. And that room full of suits? They could keep their charts. I had something better. It broke fast. Thursday morning, February 8th, 9:17 a.m., raining so hard the gutters sounded like oil drums. I was pulling cranberry scones from the oven when my phone buzzed 6 times in a row. Thought maybe someone had died. Instead, it was worse. Way worse. A local food blogger, Seattle Plate, had posted a photo carousel on Instagram with a caption that stopped my breath cold. Local darling cuts corners while lecturing the big boys. First photo, a redacted screenshot of a Gmail message from my account. Subject line, Markham Wholesale Pricing Confidential. Second photo, a box labeled margarine blend sitting in my walk-in cooler. Third photo, a still of me speaking at the vendor summit. A freeze frame that made me look smug. My phone melted. 5 missed calls. 3 canceled wholesale pickups in 20 minutes. No line at the counter. Just silence. The kind that sinks. Tessa called. Damage control, she said. Can you come in? I was already grabbing my coat. 5 minutes later, I got an email from Owen. He CC'd every vendor and half of Markham's board. Integrity and trust are non-negotiable. Violations of supplier terms will be addressed swiftly. 10 minutes after that, Graham's message came through. 6 words. We'll review. Hold all deliveries immediately. No greeting, no explanation. Just a knife in my ribs. I walked into my own walk-in cooler and stared at the box. It was there. Margarine blend, factory seal unbroken, sitting behind my flour bin like it belonged, except it didn't. Wrong supplier, wrong lot number, not even my brand. I turned to check the camera above the back door. A black square of electrical tape sat clean across the lens like a goddamn signature. I marched to the front. Trent was stacking trays. You see this? I held up my phone. He blinked. No, what is that? You tell me why there's a box of industrial margarine in my cooler and a leak from my Gmail. He held his hands up. I don't know anything about that. I swear he said it twice, like repetition made it truth. I walked to the laptop at the front counter, opened my sent mail. There it was. Timestamp, 6:41 a.m. I was laminating dough then. Both hands covered in butter and flour, nowhere near the screen. Somebody either used my machine or had my password. My jaw clenched so hard I felt my molars ache. I called Eveline. She picked up without saying hello. She just said, Stanley. My chest tightened. Don't say anything yet, I told her. Please. I didn't need reassurance. I needed to stay ahead of whatever this was turning into. Tessa believed me. She didn't say it in so many words, but I heard it. I'm coming there, she said. Save your register footage. She showed up 23 minutes later. No umbrella, soaked hair, heels scraping against the tile. She went straight to the register camera and popped the MSD card like she'd done it 100 times. We left Trent alone in the shop and drove to her office in complete silence. What followed was 6 hours of hell I couldn't help with. She had 2 monitors lit up and a yellow legal pad filling with serial numbers, timestamps, IP logs, and router bounces. I watched her fingers fly, cool and surgical, flipping through browser history, email headers, and something called a session token I still don't fully get. I'm not tech support, she muttered, but I know a frame-up when I see one. Around 7:30 p.m., I thought maybe we'd hit a dead end. She hadn't spoken in 15 minutes, just stared and wrote, stared and wrote. Then, at 8:03, she made a sound, just a short breath. But I caught it. What is it? She turned the screen toward me, a terminal screen. Code. Numbers. A tiny green highlight over a line I didn't understand. This, she said, is a router hop tied to a private wireless network. It only pinged once, About 5 minutes before the email went out. I leaned in. What's the name? She clicked through a few menus and then just pointed. Network name, NW_provisions-private Northwest Provisions, she said. That's the shell vendor Owen suggested for overflow last week. I didn't speak. I couldn't. My hands balled into fists in my lap. My stomach burned. The kind of heat that feels like betrayal. I'd been so sure I was just overwhelmed, overworked, maybe paranoid. But this was something else. I didn't sleep that night. Tessa and I sat at her office table with coffee gone cold and a folder that got thicker by the hour. By the time the sun came up, it was heavier than a Sunday paper. We'd stacked it with everything. Network logs, device access history, even screenshots from the vendor portal Owen had quietly flagged last month for overage monitoring. That line made sense now. It was cover. She pulled keypad logs from the bakery's entry system. At 5:52 a.m. on February 8th, someone punched in the door code. My shift started at 6:30. The bakery was dark and locked before then. Only 2 people had that code, me and Trent. We found Venmo screenshots showing transfers, $2,800 across 3 days, from an account labeled NWPLLC, Northwest Provisions. The moment I saw his name next to those payments, it stopped being about business. I called him and told him to meet me out back. No excuses. He showed up in his usual hoodie, still acting like we were fine. Like I hadn't just been gutted publicly and privately in the same week. I didn't waste time. You took money, I said, from a shell company tied to a sabotage leak. You used my laptop, my key code, and you planted that box. His hands didn't go up this time. He just stood there in the rain. It was just a bridge, he said. Quiet like that made it softer. They said you'd be fine, that it wouldn't stick. I stared at him. Nothing. Not rage. Not even sadness. Just 10 seconds of silence, long enough to make him look away like I wasn't even standing there. We didn't shake. We didn't yell. I just turned, and he followed me to the truck. The binder sat between us like a loaded weapon. We walked into Markham HQ through the main doors. The receptionist tried to stop us. Tessa flashed her badge. We went straight to the top floor. The conference room had already been set. Long table. Graham at the head, arms folded. Owen to his right, cocky like he'd just hit a quarterly goal. Eveline on the left, looking at the table like it was a cliff. PR was there. Legal too. Couple of board members I recognized from industry articles. No one said good morning. Owen went first, stood and launched into a statement like it was rehearsed. We take vendor integrity seriously. When partners jeopardize our brand, our response is firm and final. We will not tolerate corner cutting, leaks, or public damage to our reputation. Tessa didn't flinch, just walked up and set the binder down on the table with a flat slap that made Owen blink. She looked at me. I opened it. Here's what actually happened. I laid it out clean. Door entry logs showing unauthorized access at 5:52 a.m. The taped-over backdoor camera. The wrong labeled box placed after hours. The margarine that wasn't mine. I flipped the page. Then came the digital trail. Sent mail time-stamped when I was wrist-deep in laminated dough. Access from my IP address, but a different device session logged in through cached credentials. Trent didn't speak. Didn't move. Next page. Payment logs. NWPLLC had wired money to Owen's assistant. Not directly to Owen, of course not, but her name was on the statement, and her brother ran Northwest Provisions on paper. I slid the final piece across the table. Screenshots of Trent's Venmo, his own admission, and the data trail linking everything back to a single wireless login tied to a SODO address registered as overflow storage. That was the nail. Owen went pale, then red, then pale again. He opened his mouth twice before Graham raised a hand to stop him. The room froze. Graham leaned forward, hands folded. Is this bulletproof? Tessa nodded once. Legal started writing. The PR guy pulled out a tablet. One of the board members whispered something to the other. and it didn't sound forgiving. I looked at Graham. You can fire me if you want, but if you do, you bury your problem alive. Not mine. Yours. He didn't argue. I kept going. I want damages for business lost. I want the exclusivity clause torn up, in writing. I want my supplier rights reinstated, and I want the apology to come from this table, not through PR spin. He didn't stop me. And one more thing, I said. You stop using your money to push Evelyn around. No more custody threats. No more tying trust fund access to conditions she didn't agree to. That was when the air left the room, like someone had cracked a window in the dead of winter. Evelyn didn't look up, but her shoulders dropped. Graham stared at her, then at me. It wasn't a glare. It wasn't anger. It was the face of a man who realized someone finally said the thing he thought no one would dare say out loud. He looked around the room, then back at me. We'll do what's right, he said. And for the first time, I actually believed him. Just a little. The fallout moved quick once it started. Owen's resignation hit inboxes on February 26th. To pursue new opportunities, the statement read. Classic corporate spin. Reality? He was gone, and not even his smirk survived the press release. His office got boxed by noon. Trent signed a confession and a mutual no disparagement agreement 2 days later. No trial, no headlines, just a 4-page document that kept us both out of the news. I didn't ruin him, but I didn't save him either. He moved out of state. I didn't ask where. Markham's legal team ran quiet and fast after that. 1 week later, I had a check in my hand for $187,500. Damages, loss of business, canceled wholesale, and the headache of public defamation. They also tore up the exclusivity clause and rewrote the supplier agreement clean. No auto-renew, no exclusivity, no gag clauses buried in fine print. Tessa met me outside a Thai place near the waterfront to hand it over. She didn't sit, just passed the envelope and said, I've seen worse settlements for bigger disasters. You did all right? I don't feel all right. You will. She turned and walked off like she hadn't just handed me a lifeline. The first thing I did was ask her for every clause Graham had ever used to tie custody or support to Evelyn's trust access. She hesitated for maybe half a breath, then nodded. 2 days later, I had the folder. Evelyn came to my office late at night after the bakery closed. I sat across from her and slid it across the desk. She opened it slowly, page by page, scanning language that had clearly been used to control more than money. Her hands shook around the second section. By the fourth, she was crying quietly and didn't try to stop. She didn't say much. I didn't say anything either. We hired a family lawyer named Ralph Bishop, retired military, straight-backed, smelled like pipe smoke and printer toner. He was in his 60s and didn't blink once during our first meeting, wore a bow tie with polka dots like he had nothing to prove. He read every line, circled half the document in red, then said, "These aren't custody clauses. They're leverage weapons." Then he got to work. He wrote letters like a surgeon cuts, precise, bloodless, and lethal. Every word polite, but lined with steel. The first one landed on Graham's desk with zero warning. A week later, his lawyers started walking backwards. Not fast, but they moved, clause by clause, restriction by restriction. Evelyn got breathing room for the first time in years. Mid-March, my landlord called me while I was loading sheet trays. "Buyers closing in May," he said. "Paperwork's already rolling." I thanked him and hung up, then stood there in the alley with my hands on my hips like a man about to get punched again. But I wasn't taking hits this time. I called my bank and opened a new LLC the next day. Transferred the entire settlement into escrow and started the process. It felt insane. I was stepping into a mortgage with 1 full-time employee and 2 part-timers, no safety net, and a walk-in fridge that still whined every time it defrosted. But I was also holding my say in my own hands for the first time in years. On March 21st, I signed the purchase and sale agreement. Escrow opened. And on May 14th, 2018, I walked into a cold office with a real estate attorney and signed the closing papers that made me the owner of my building. It didn't feel victorious. It felt unreal, like I was waiting for someone to yell, "Just kidding." I didn't tell anyone. Not Evelyn, not Nina, not even Tessa. That night, I brought up 2 folding chairs and a pizza box from the shop. We sat in the empty upstairs office, just the 3 of us, with the windows open and the May air drifting in soft and slow. Nina raced back and forth across the linoleum floor on her scooter, laughing, showing off how fast she could turn with the new socket. Evelyn leaned back in the chair with her feet up, sipping root beer from a bottle. She looked tired, but better. I watched them, chewing crust I couldn't taste, and blinked hard when I felt the sting. I pretended I wasn't crying. Nobody called me on it. We just sat there. No speeches, no champagne, no plans. Just the hum of a bakery below us and the quiet truth that, for once, I'd made it through a storm without losing everything. Spring didn't show up in one clean piece. It crept in slow, like it was testing the air. First came the longer light, then the early strawberries at the market. Then, finally, people standing in line again outside Harbor Loaf, without needing to be convinced. Business came back slower than my nerves, but then, suddenly, it all hit at once, like folks had been waiting for the smoke to clear before coming home. I wrote a long Facebook post one night. No names, no call-outs. Just the truth in plain language. I said we went through something rough. I said it cost more than money. I said we came out the other side better and tighter. I said thank you. People shared it more than I expected. Old customers, new ones, even a few other bakers who'd been through their own quiet hell. 2 weeks later, we launched a Wednesday line called Nina's Picks. Her idea. Her name. She picked the flavors, tested them, approved them. Some were hits, some bombed hard. Either way, 10% of all Wednesday sales went straight to a local nonprofit for kids with limb differences. Every week she'd come in with a notebook and rate her own product. Too soft. Perfect crust. Needs more lemon. One afternoon I caught her explaining gluten development to a guy twice her size. I just leaned on the counter and let her do her thing. Evelyn started volunteering at a community kitchen project on Capitol Hill around that time. Then she got offered a small coordinator role. It turned into a part-time job teaching teenagers how to chop onions without slicing off fingers and how to show up on time even when you don't feel like it. "She's the only reason half these kids finish a recipe," one of the directors told me when I dropped off a donation box. She didn't brag, just rolled her eyes and said, "I yell a lot." That's all. One day in early May, I dropped in unannounced. Evelyn was teaching a small group of high schoolers how to make stock from scraps. At the back of the room, I spotted someone watching quietly from the corner. It was Graham. No entourage, no clipboard. Just him in a windbreaker, arms crossed, standing near the door like he didn't want to be seen. He didn't say a word, just watched his daughter work. After about 20 minutes, he slipped out the side without speaking to anyone. I didn't bring it up. Neither did Evelyn. Tessa and I stayed in touch. More than that. We set up a small vendor cooperative between a few local producers. Dairy, flour, basic ingredients. Nothing fancy, just honest pricing without the race to the bottom. No one got rich, but no one got squeezed. We built in clauses that would have made Owen choke. Fair lead times, transparency rules, bulk break protections for emergencies. "You just wrote the rules you wish they gave you," she said one day while reviewing the shared contract. "Damn right," I told her. A reporter from the Seattle Weekly caught wind of the story. Did a piece on the hidden cost of cheap food. She asked if I wanted to go on record. I said yes, but I kept it clean. No naming names. Just the numbers, the strain, and the cost of cutting corners you can't get back. "Why didn't you name the company?" she asked, before the piece ran. "Because the problem's bigger than a logo," I said. Late that month, I finally told Evelyn I owned the building. She blinked at me like I was joking. Then she laughed, sharp and sudden, like a breath she didn't know she was holding. "You're serious," she said, standing in the middle of the kitchen in her boots and flour apron. "Yeah," Signed the papers in May. It's ours now. She hugged me so hard I nearly dropped the knife in my hand. It wasn't light. It wasn't polite. It was the kind of hug people give when they think maybe, just maybe, they don't have to keep running anymore. Nina helped me plant strawberries in a big half-barrel outside the front door. The soil was cold and sticky, but she didn't care. She wore plastic gloves that were too big and sang off-key while we worked. Customers started asking about her more than they asked about the bread. "How's the Wednesday boss doing? She fire you yet?" I built a ramp with my own 2 hands. Took me 4 nights and a pulled-back muscle, but I finished it. No more makeshift plywood boards when Nina showed up with her scooter. Eveline asked why I didn't hire someone to do it. Because I wanted to feel it in my hands. We didn't say more than that. We started sleeping better after that. Not because things got easy, but because they finally felt ours. 2 years later, on June 6, 2020, we opened the new wing of the community kitchen. No ribbon wall, no grand opening speeches from city council. Just kitchen scissors, a folding table, and a white banner with Room 44 painted in crooked red brushstrokes by a kid who spelled ingredients wrong. We kept it small: concrete floors, bright yellow walls, 1 commercial stove, 3 prep tables, and enough masks to cover every face twice. The name came from the bus Nina used to ride past Harbor Loaf. 44. The one she waited for that night under the rain, shivering in that purple jacket. It felt right to name it after the road that got her to us. I stood at the front with scissors in one hand and a knot in my throat. "Let's cut this thing," Eveline said behind me. So I did. Nina came up a minute later, no scooter. Her new leg had a Seahawks sticker on it, the bold blue logo shining against the carbon fiber like a badge. She walked steady and proud, her chin high, and lifted her foot to show me without a word. I raised an eyebrow. "That's the new official bakery uniform now?" "Only if you let me paint yours," she said. Eveline was handing out aprons by the rack, rolling her eyes every time I tried to move a chair. "You do realize you can delegate now," she said. "I'd delegate when I'm dead," I shot back. Graham showed up late. Windbreaker, no tie, hair thinner, face older. Looked like time had been louder than he planned for. He shook my hand and didn't squeeze too hard. "You were right about standards," he said. I nodded. "You were right about consistency." He smiled barely. "I've got a new offer. Regional, clean terms, no tricks. Just product, pricing, and trust. I didn't even blink. I'll supply when I can. Local, honest, and no midnight surprises. That's the deal." He nodded and didn't push. That part mattered. I saw Tessa leaning in the doorway, watching like she always did. Silent, precise, making sure nothing slipped. When the scissors went back in the drawer, someone tapped a spoon on a pot and made me give a speech. I kept it short. I didn't plan any of this. No vision board, no 5-year roadmap. This didn't start as a business story. It started because a kid needed to get warm in the rain. And sometimes, that's all it takes. People clapped. I kept my hands in my pockets and stared at the floor until it stopped. Later, I stood by the strawberry barrel with a paper cup of lemonade, watching the sun bounce off the glass. It smelled like soap and yeast and something good coming out of the oven. Trent walked by on the sidewalk. He slowed near the entrance, looked at the sign, looked at me. His eyes held for a second. Then he kept going. I didn't wave. I didn't stop him. But I didn't feel good about it either. Some losses don't pay out. That's the truth of it. That afternoon, a man from a hotel group emailed asking for a reference on Owen. I didn't add any color. I just sent the documents, the folder Tessa helped build, the logs, the receipts. I let the facts speak for themselves. That was enough for me. No speeches, no revenge, just record keeping. Eveline came outside a little later, bumped her shoulder into mine like it was routine. "You kept your place," she said. I looked at her. "We kept it." Nina tugged at my sleeve. "Can I decorate Saturday's cookies?" "Only if you charge me full price," I said. She grinned and stuck out her pinky. "Deal." We walked back inside together. The ovens were humming. The floor smelled like sugar and bleach. The register beeped. The door swung open and shut. Money in the box. Folks in line. Nobody asking what almost happened. I didn't need a plaque. I didn't need a spotlight. I had taken back the one thing nobody could give me and no one could take away. My say. My name. My work. When you're faced with a choice between quick money or keeping your name and standards, what would you choose? Share in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe. It's very important for us. And just one click for you.
YouTube picked this for you. Tap it. Let's see if they guessed right.